G'day everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Australian Property Investment Podcast. Now, if you're like me and you've got two small kids who you love dearly, but then when you look in your bank balance, sometimes you go, where does my money go? That is the exact topic we're going to talk about. Now, you may be wondering, what has this got to do with investing in property? And I'll tell you right now, it's got to do a lot with investing in property. The reason we get a lot of investors come into the market is because they want to set their family up for the long term. Maybe it's like, I want to set myself up for retirement, but I'm also worried about my kids at some point getting into the property market. There's no doubt the property market is super, super expensive at the moment. We think what our parents paid for property versus what we pay. Imagine what our children and their children are going to be paying for property as well. So it pays to invest in the future. And we're going to talk about how to navigate investing, but also the here and now, which is managing cash flow as well. Which brings to mind this saying that kids ain't cheap, which is the title of Ana Kresina's book. Anna, welcome on. How you doing?
Great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for giving it time. I really, really appreciate it. Had a look through your book. I think you've smashed it out the park. And a lot of what you say is what I'd have conversations with people one-on-one, navigating that childcare, navigating return to work, navigating who's going to be kind of running the household, for example. But sitting, I guess, underpinning all those decisions is financial freedom and security. And I think you have absolutely nailed that. So we're going to get into it. So just to kind of preface, I've got this off Bernadette's desk. That's my two girls, Sienna and Zara. It's going back probably a good year or two. And, I often look back at, when they were born to now, and they're fond times, but you feel like you're a bit of a money pit as well at that time.
They are.
Childcare expenses are, absolutely astronomical. And so for some families that go down from two incomes to one income, navigating cash flow becomes like it's a real tussle in a household as well. It dictates, when mums, after mat leave have to return back to work, which is a sad reality. It is a reality. It's a sad reality. So that should give us a bit of context for today's chat. So now, before we kick off, just have to learn about yourself a little bit personally, professionally, and where you are in your journey as well.
Yeah, perfect. So I'm a financial educator. I'm an author. I also work in the financial industry as well. And when I was going on my second parental leave, I realized that there just wasn't enough resources for parents who want to navigate this time. It's the only time in your life where you actually have a decrease in your income and an increase in your expenses. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of what launched me into trying to capture all of this information, put it in a book called Kids Ain't Cheap, and hoping to help other parents. But prior to that, I've always been interested in personal finance, and I was working in the tech sector and then ended up in the finance or fintech sector. So finance has always been a passion of mine. And actually, I came across the Financial Independence Retire Early movement, which I became very passionate about because I thought, I want financial independence. And this was something that I pursued prior to having children. And I'm grateful that I had, because it allowed me to create more of a lifestyle that I want now. So I do work part-time. I also have part-time passion projects, and then I'm a full-time parent as well.
Yes.
So that's the balance and the reality for many of us who want to start a family. And as we all know, if you can start early, that always has a huge compounding effect on us. And that's kind of how I came to where I am now.
Excellent. I love that. And exactly what you said there, which is parenting is a full-time journey. I said that to someone else the other day. I was like, you have effectively two full-time gigs. One pays well, the other takes a lot of time and energy, that has its own dividends and rewards as well, right? And it's a rewarding journey. So to kind of lay the foundation for our chat today, and I've just done these numbers earlier. When I put in a couple that's earning some fairly good incomes, we'll call it 100, 120K each, I put in having a baby, and it took $76,000 off their borrowing capacity, which is nuts. Like straight away, huge. It's just added. And then you think about the return to work side of that. Generally, you're saying right now you're part-time, right? Purely from a demand perspective as well. So you go, right, return to work means our incomes have dropped again. So we never were at that income when we were dinks, so double income, no kids. Now we've got double income children, for example. That's going to take a lot of expenses, reduce our incomes. And then often by this stage, loss of income, you're not saving as much as well during that period, given that the expenses have gone up. Mm-hmm. So I want to help you with that in mind, help us unpack what you've talked about, the research that you've done when you talk about kids ain't cheap and what it costs not only to bear a child, but to raise a child as well.
Yeah. So unfortunately, there's not a lot of information in Australia around the actual cost of raising a child. The best I could find was somewhere around $450,000 from birth to 18 years of age, but this was a few years back. So I reckon it's closer to 500,000 at least. And that's not if you're considering things like private school fees and so forth. And as we know, even the cost of early childhood education and care has gone up. So childcare is much more expensive than it was a few years back. There are some subsidies that come into play that can help parents as well, but it comes back to cash flow, right? What you just discussed. Having and understanding your cash flow is going to be so important within that time. So kids are really expensive in the beginning if you have them in early childhood education and care, because for me, my childcare costs were the equivalent of my rent, and I could not believe that. Like literally, that is so much money, and unfortunately, that does hopefully come to an end if you go to public school. But if you go to private school, there's going to be additional costs. And research shows that children get more expensive as they get older. They eat more, they have more activities, there's more transportation costs, there's the demands around having technology at hand, and that costs quite a bit. So there's a lot of budgeting that needs to happen regardless of where you are in your cycle of parenthood. And then there's also the planning that happens before that. There's a lot of considerations that have to come to you if you're looking at private health or public, and all of that is very dependent on what your needs are. So there's a lot of planning that has to happen just for that cash flow, let alone other things that you might be considering, such as buying property and how that fits in your parenting journey.
You're spot on. And I think when you're going through this stage of baby, thinking about maybe starting a family, and even you've had clients that have gone through IVF. Now, touch wood, that wasn't our journey.
Very expensive.
Very expensive. So it's like they've had savings and they're just watching it, go out the door, for this dream of starting a family, and that can often be part of their home loan, home deposit as well. So that starts to go out. So a lot of energy has gone into, can we have a family? Can we fall pregnant? We fall pregnant, then we go into this stage of like this, acquiring stuff for a baby and nesting as well. But then sitting behind that is very little of time is going into financial planning. It's very much going into family planning, right? And we see people
and survival mode.
Yeah.
In a lot of cases, it's survival mode for that first little while. Also, priorities have changed for a lot of more modern families, right? As well. Traditionally, historically, people would get married, they'd buy a house, and then they'd have families. For me, that absolutely wasn't the case. I'm not married, not planning on getting married, but my partner and I had kids, and then we bought a house. And so these are different things that happen as society has changed, as our priorities have changed. So a lot of my friends are in very similar situations where they're renting, they have kids, and they're looking to buy their family home. And then there's the decisions that need to be made there. And in many cases, what I heard when I was doing research for the book, I interviewed a whole bunch of families and parents in this situation. There were so many surprising things that they didn't know about. For example, this seems like a simple one when we talk about it, but if you're on parental leave, you might not be able to get as large of a mortgage as you thought you would because you're now currently on leave. Now, it makes sense. You're not having money coming in. But on the flip side is this is probably not at the forefront of your thinking, right? Like you're focusing on other things. You're like getting your house in order. You're trying to, look for a place. And the last thing you need are these financial hurdles that you need to jump over that you didn't consider due to your family planning. So those are some of the things that I've heard along the way.
You've nailed it. And I think the conversation you had with people when and you even said it, we had kids and then we were renting and then we bought children. And the amount of times that happens, I guess when you go, now we want to put down roots in a particular area, we know we want to be childcare, schools, family, for example, around us. And then you got to buy, and like I said, you've got one child that's taking $76,000 up to on your reduction in borrowing capacity. You add a second in there, and then you definitely drop down two incomes and those expenses have gone up. So your borrowing capacity has dropped significantly. And that's when you typically are thinking about buying. I mean, we definitely bought our family home just before our second daughter. And that's because we knew exactly where we wanted to live. We had enough savings and we're very clear on the type of property that we wanted. And that's, again, our line of work, we see families time and time again buying. And it's like, hey, look, if we can kind of bring this forward a little bit upstream, you might be able to buy better home, for example, or at a better time in the market compared to being stressed with two small kids trying to find a home now.
Yeah, the added thing to that though, if you do that, is understanding your cash flow again, right? So
Yeah.
it's like you might struggle with your mortgage payments, and you know more about this than than I,
Yeah.
of course, do. But I see it with so many parents as well, being like, oh, on dual income, we were able to purchase, and now that we've dropped one of our incomes, or now we're also paying for childcare. There's a bit of a struggle with that, but like you said, it's really important to plan ahead of time. And one of the things on my end that I was quite grateful for was when we were looking to purchase our family home. It was during COVID. The prices were out of control out in Melbourne, as they were in other places as well. And we thought we were going to get priced out of an area. Luckily, one of the things was I owned a property, a rental property in Canada, which was my original home, my first home. And I ended up selling that and using the equity in that. Or no, I didn't sell it at the time. I remortgaged it
Yeah.
to use the equity in my house, and then eventually sold it to put money in my offset. And it's just one of those things where when you're thinking about climbing up the property ladder, if there are investment properties that you have prior to buying your home, or any kind of equity that you have, it's great to strategically think about that as your needs change, right?
Yeah.
Through your life.
Spot on. Which brings us to one of a very popular, I guess, pathway for especially younger couples or singles. They can't afford it. They're not going to buy the big home. So they go, I'm going to go Rentvest. So, live in your case, live in Melbourne. I've still got an investment property that kind of produces income so that, I'm not hemorrhaging too much from a rent perspective. So these rent vesting models become very popular. But then we kind of see when it comes to a grinding halt is when a family says, but actually we want to stop renting. We want the security for our own family. We want the stability that we're going to not get kicked out by a landlord or have rental increases that are out of our control. We want to dictate terms. So therefore we want to buy. And so you then effectively have all this investment debt and not much deposit, for example, until you sell the properties, or you've got the equity to pull out. So take me through, have you had this conversation around rent vesting with would-be parents or our parents, and the pros and cons that you've discussed as well?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of considerations, and it really kind of depends on the individual people in terms of what they're looking for. But one of the things that I thought was really important, and I wish more people talked about it, was the implications of when you're selling something. So whether you're selling a property, or in my situation, I sold a bunch of shares to also help fund our family home. And because I was doing it at a time where I was also a high income earner, it threw me in the highest tax bracket. And due to that, I lost out on childcare subsidy, and I lost out on my paid parental leave, which I was thinking about. And this is poor financial planning on my behalf, right? Always talk to a financial advisor or a tax accountant. This is a great example of that, but especially so if you're planning on bringing kids into the world, or you're using any type of subsidies, because all of that is focused on your taxable income. And there are many families like me who are like, I think I'm going to make the right choice, and I'm going to sell our property to help fund the home that we want, not thinking about the tax implication that like, of course you have to pay tax. We all pay tax. That's fine, right? It's just part of life. But the ongoing effect of that, and how that might affect your childcare subsidy and your paid parental leave. And that I wish more people talked about.
Absolutely. You again smashed it there, because you take the sugar hit and you sell it, and then most people take the cash and then go and do something with it, not realizing they've got the capital gains tax bill as well for that. So not only are you missing out subsidies, or you're not going to be paid, say, parental leave as well, but then you've also got future capital gains tax that will come back and sting you at some point in the future if you haven't factored that in. So at that point, you're really thinking, have you engaged your accountant? Have you engaged your financial planner, for example? And then if you're thinking around a loan, have you engaged your mortgage broker to find out? Because there are lenders that will do, and this might be news to some people, there are lenders that will do loans for couples that are still on maternity or paternity leave, as long as you can show like a return to work letter, you can show a return to work date, or if you've got savings that can get you through from where you are now till that return to work date, that will still factor in your future income. So don't let that be a decision that you put off buying a home or investing in property because you don't have the two incomes. to your point earlier, it's managing the cash flow that becomes critical for you as well, because the last thing you want is when you've got a newborn that's enough, or a younger child, there's enough kind of juggling going on at the moment to
Yeah.
juggle a financial ball on top of that. You're playing with fire sometimes.
And some mortgages, from my understanding, or some banks, some lenders, will also let you pause your mortgage for a while. Of course, the interest continues to accrue, so don't think that you're scot free on that. But nonetheless, it might be another consideration when it comes to cash flow. It's really important in those situations to run the numbers and see how much more it'll cost you because you're deferring it to a later time. But that is another consideration that parents can think about, because cash flow is really important in those first couple years.
That's exactly it. Anna, well said. And so there's a couple of options there we think about people that have a mortgage. If you get in early and you say, look, this is what we're looking to do, you can switch the loan from principal interest to interest only. And if you sit on a little bit of cash, put the cash in the offset account, reduces your monthly repayments as well. So again, we're talking cash flow for a household. It's how do we get smart about it? But that means we're kind of going upstream to go, let's get organized about it too. And don't leave it too late, because quite often they're like, don't. And the other party is being very, very open. I found this out the hard way. So we had a client come to us, and this when banks were starting just to use bank statement data. So give us your transaction history, and we'll look through it. And the bank assessor called me, goes, I think they're going to have a baby. And I said, I don't think so. I've just met them, and she doesn't look very pregnant at all. And they're like, no, we can see ultrasounds coming up on the bank statements. And I called them, and they're like, yeah, but we haven't even told our parents yet. And I was the first person to find out besides the bank assessor. And it's those small things that can catch you out. If you're not being open and honest, it can come back and bite you in the bum. Like we had a valuer go out one day to a property, do a physical inspection on the property, and they could see a crib being built in the spare room. And the valuer made a note of this, and the bank assessors looked at that saying, I think they're having a baby as well. So again, if you're trying to hide it, I think, just be upfront about it, and we can navigate that as well.
Wow, those are such interesting takes as well, because it's such a challenging time, right? As a parent, you're trying to navigate this, and knowing that you might be doing the right thing by getting your crib, or getting ultrasounds, you're going to get caught out on that.
Yeah,
That's crazy.
it is.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, they're anecdotes, but it's amazing when we tell clients that as well. So buying property before kids or with kids would be, and again, we're not giving financial advice, so this conversation is general in nature, but one thought we've always had with the younger Australians before they start a family is what we call a stretch property. So look, double income, no kids, this will be your best borrowing capacity unless you're due for a significant pay rise. For example, they've got a new qualification coming up. So look, this could be a time that we go in for a stretch property. You go in and you stretch because you're double income, no kids, and then you maybe choose to rent that property out until you're ready to move into that property at some point in the future, if you know where and what type of family home you want to buy. Or you buy a stepping stone property, which gets you into the market, which means you're not renting, means you own your own home. And like you said, you could pause or defer those repayments too, but it means you've got some security and stability still in the property market too. So again, when you're talking to parents, when you're going, hey, what are the property strategies? How do you think and forward plan or Rentvest? How do you have this conversation as a couple that, it's money, a family? How do you have this conversation as a couple? I know we're going outside the scope of kids ain't cheap, but it's got to be somewhere there where you've had experience in talking to your partner, for example, around how do we navigate our financial future very openly and transparently.
Yeah, one of the things on our end as well is because our first property here in Australia, so this is a very weird thing, is that I own property in Canada, used the equivalent of a first home super saver there, slightly different setup, but I got to use that here as well in Australia for my first home. So that was something that we found advantageous because we were purchasing our first home and planning on living in it. So our first property was partially funded through my first home super saver. So that's another consideration for some parents as well, if they haven't owned property before, to look into, because it can be quite lucrative using your super for that as well.
Yeah, nice. Beautiful. The financial impact, and I don't want to generalize here, but I can only talk for maybe my example of friends that I've seen as well, is generally that role of carer is mum at that point, right? So the role of a mum I can see you get torn and stretched in so many different directions. And at that point, mum comes out of her career or workforce participation to care for a child at some point until we can get them into childcare and return to work. But there is a whole raft of underlying issues that happen at that point. We're talking loss of income, lack of superannuation, compounding as well. What are some of the other impacts that you see, particularly for mums that are trying to juggle as they stay out of the workforce or return and integrate back in?
Yeah, it's quite huge, and unfortunately, it affects mothers predominantly than than fathers in heterosexual couples, which is a challenge, right? Like a lot of it comes down to of you know, it's great to have a parent home with the kids, but can we be a bit more equitable with that? And a lot of it comes down to policy and support from companies being able to support both parents in dual income homes to be able to do that. But when it comes to mothers specifically and women, it's a huge disparity that happens. On average, a 25-year-old woman today who has at least one child can expect to earn 2 million less over her lifetime than an average 25-year-old man who becomes a father. So
Wow.
those numbers are huge. And what we see as well is this thing called the motherhood penalty. And what that is that researchers found that women suffer an average of around 5 to 20% per child that they have. And this is an ongoing effect that continues on, because it's not that mothers take a year off and then go back to work at full time. Often mothers, what they'll do is they'll maybe work part-time or increase their hours, or they have another child, so they take another year off and slowly come back. And often we see the effect of that over 10 plus years. Now, the crazy part with that is that we also see it in the data when it comes to superannuation. So women earn 136,000 less in their super over their working lives. So, and that is about $150,000 below what is considered a comfortable retirement. And as we see, women are also more likely to end up in poverty or in homelessness. And a lot of that comes down to taking many years off of work. That compounds. They have less money. And then in the case that a divorce happens or separation, they also end up with less money and have to kind of start from scratch again. So this unfortunately disproportionately affects women, and it is something that needs to be discussed. Some of the other things that happen once women are out of the workforce is they reduce their earning capacity. So they usually don't, they might not earn as much as they used to. It's harder for them to get raises or take on more senior roles when they do return. And then of course the super, we see them with much less money in their retirement fund. So there's a lot of things to consider if you're a parent taking parental leave, and how that can be a bit more equitable if you're in a two-parent household.
Oh, mate, I think you've captured the essence of the last couple of years that I've witnessed. Friends and even we're lucky that Bernadette and I, we work in this business, but for Bernie to kind of take on the workload that she had beforehand versus now, it's like you've got to have effectively one foot out. We think about childcare, and I think even as a mum, you get very torn. I mean, as a dad, I feel it, but
There's
I
a
think
lot of guilt.
they call it mum guilt,
Yeah.
the parent guilt as well. Going, kids are in before or after school care or longer day care, for example, and you feel like you're not around as much and your work's demanding, but you go, but I need the income to support my family. And it can be quite a circular argument in your head, and just going, I don't feel like I'm really winning in either camp. and you think about cost of living on top of all, you overlay that on what families are feeling. They're often forced back to work longer at the moment to keep up with the current cost pressures as well, isn't it?
Yeah, a lot of people have to kind of juggle that, because everything's gone up in price, right? Even just groceries. And as your kids get older, that's something that's absolutely hard to manage. There's only so much bulk buying and cooking you can do, right?
Exactly. The other one is when we talk about investing in property, and this is again where they're like, oh, we'll come back to that in a few years' time, and you come back, and it feels like sometimes younger families will kick the can down the road because now they've got the home. The home's got equity. They know they could or should be buying an investment property, and that laying foundations for the long-term future, whether that's for their own retirement or for their kids' nest eggs as well. And they go, right, we're going to get to it, and then they'll get to it later. It's like they'll never be a good time. Like you're saying, you get this sweet spot from coming out of childcare into like maybe primary school, where they're public school, and then maybe think about you got this window before they start private school or high school, and the costs start to go up. So there's this window. So how do we get couples, families thinking about investing in the future while also knowing, hey, look, it might be a rock and a hard place at the moment, but in 20 years' time, you'll thank yourself for these hard decisions you've had to make now.
Yeah, these are great questions because there's a couple different ways I think that we as parents can consider this, right? If, for example, you have equity in the home, that's really fantastic that someone can draw down on. If there's money in an offset account, that might be available as well. But then similarly, if there is a bit of cash flow, there also is the opportunity to invest, especially if it's a longer term horizon that then can maybe be pulled out to buy a property or just kept there in order to grow over time with compounding. So there are different there are alternative avenues that parents can consider as their kids get older, as they have more equity, as potentially that cash flow becomes a bit more manageable because it is quite hard in those beginning few years. So there's different avenues to pursue that way.
Yeah, awesome. In your book, I just want to kind of cover off, more about your book as well. What are some of the big insights that you had? Because when you write a book, I feel I've said it to everyone, it holds up a mirror to kind of, what am I really putting out here? And is there real conviction? And it might be coming up with something quite original, or the concepts that you've kind of percolated and sat on as well. So for people who haven't read your book or unfamiliar with your work, what else have you unpacked in your book?
Yeah, well, like I mentioned, I think there's a lot of information around how to talk to your kids about money and teach them about money, and there's a lot of information around property investing or shares investing, but there's very little about that in between weird time, right? Like I'm
Mm.
planning a family, so I might need to consider the cost around IVF and so forth, but I also want to get ahead. So, such as myself being interested in financial independence, how can I invest for my future? But then also rounding that out with all of the other things you need to consider. Am I eligible for subsidies? Am I eligible for childcare subsidies? Childcare and parental leave. What are the other costs when it comes to giving birth? What are the costs with like that first year of having a child? Like that's that's quite expensive as you're trying to get furniture for your house and get everything set up. So I wanted to capture those first years there, and then a part of the book also kind of rounds out around investing. So if you're looking at investing for your child, because that's something that people want to do, they want to set their child up for the future. Investing in shares, what does that look like? And potentially can be used for helping support your child purchase their first property, and then how to talk to your kids about money, because that's another thing. First, it starts with us. We really need to understand our money mindset. How do we feel about money? What are our hang-ups about it, or where do we really excel? And then how do we communicate that to our kids as well? We've heard tons of things from our parents that we've taken on to ourselves when it comes to money, whether we think money's the root of all evil or
Money doesn't grow
money's
on trees.
abundant and does it grow on trees? Yeah. Or it's easy to get in your hands, whether you came from a frugal or a frivolous household.
Yes.
How we talk about money, how we think about money is going to be conveyed to our kids one way or another. So just thinking about that upfront is really important, as our kids grow, because by the age of 7, which is quite young, by the age of 7, kids already understand basic budgeting, savings, and delayed gratification. And
Yeah.
anyone who's in personal finance knows delayed gratification is the secret to keeping on for a long journey when it comes to seeing your wealth grow.
Yeah, nicely said. I think I had that penny drop moment. We're at the shops the other day with Sienna, my 5-year-old, and you walk past Smiggle and it's like it just sucks them right in. And I said, "Not today, buddy. I'll work and get some more money." And then really loud, she goes, "I just wish we were rich." And everyone just turned around and looked at us. And I had this smile. I'm like, "Yep, she's being taught that we wait
Yeah,
until we can
yeah.
save up." But it's funny how they absorb that when you talk about the money. And hey, not today, buddy. Let's try and save up. And yes, canteen becomes a thing at school. And it's like, these are
Yeah.
all conversations that I'm not equipped for. And naturally,
Yeah.
I'm going to lean on whatever I was told, which was, hey, money doesn't grow on trees, or we don't have the money for that. And it shapes their attitude in around money and how they look at it. And they don't see the coins or the cash like we had when we were
Yeah.
kids. So it's intangible. So you teach them effectively about something intangible, and trying to rewire. We see it when we get to older adults or younger Australians. It's like their money behaviors and their money attitudes are shaped by parents at a very, very young age. So get them to rewire that, like relying on credit cards, for example, or using credit cards to go on overseas holidays and having, debt for cars, for example, a lot of that is learnt and taught behavior. So trying to rewire or reshape someone's attitude is a big steep learning curve. And then you come into a relationship where someone else has got a very different attitude around money and trying to build a financial future around that together. You can't build a house off two different floor plans.
Yeah, that's a great way of thinking about
Yeah.
it. It is interesting because so much of parenting, as you probably can tell, is thinking about our own childhood. Like I think
Yeah.
quite a bit about money not growing on trees and what's the language that I'm using, and even just changing words around like we can't afford that, to saying that's not our priority right now, so let's discuss what our priority is, and getting kids on board with just even those slight language changes.
Mm.
I know when it comes to food, and when we run out of food, I say quite a bit like, it's okay, we'll buy some more at the shops. And I'm wondering if my child is thinking that, hey, we can just buy anything if we run out of it, because his little car broke, and he said, that's okay, we'll buy a new one. And I thought, oh no, we need to rediscuss some of this some of this wording that we're using in our house. But like anything, it takes a while. And it's us as parents just constantly thinking about the words that we're using and the language that we're using. And then on top of that, like you said, we don't see cash
Mm.
isn't there anymore. Loss aversion is a real psychological thing that happens as we lose money, as we give away money. There is something in our brain that makes us feel like we've lost something. And if we physically don't see it, if we don't see the coins and the
Yeah.
cash leaving our hands, and instead we tap, it doesn't have the same psychological impact on us. And so if we have kids, it's really important for them to actually have sometimes those physical coins, whether you're doing those money jars or anything of that sort. Just having some of that physicality is really important for kids to understand money and how it works in the real world.
Absolutely. And I want to say thank you so much. It's your journey. Actually, there's one last question I want to ask you. You mentioned before around fire. I feel like I'm very,
Mm-hmm.
very late to the fire party. Um, Take me through, how did you get your head around that? Because when I've talked to some people, on some pretty good incomes, they're like, how am I going to replace this income that they're on? There's, good 6-figure incomes. And then what do they do at that point if they're going to retire early? And what is that? It feels like, have they sold themselves a little bit short because they've got so much left in the tank? How have you reconciled this notion of fire for you? And what does it look like in your lifestyle?
Yeah, so I've always been more of a adventure experience driven person,
Yep.
and for me money was always a means of being able to allow me to live the life that I wanted. So I was a huge traveler when I was younger, and money was a means to allow me to take time off and travel and adventure. So when I came across fire, I was like, oh my gosh, this just will help me expedite my goal, because I already was goal focused. I knew savings allowed me to do X, Y, and Z, but now instead of putting it in savings, I'm going to put some in investing. So I was a bit late to the investing journey, if that makes sense, like investing in shares. But it comes back down to those behaviors. Having those behaviors in play makes it so much easier to make that switch, whether you're saving for a house or you're saving and investing for financial independence. So for me, the shift was quite easy to do, because I was already trying to live a quite frugal lifestyle. Because for me, it was about the adventures that don't sometimes have to cost that much money. You don't have to jump on a plane. You can adventure elsewhere. And because I had some money, that kind of propelled me to start and get into the share market, see how it fluctuates. And I think it must be over. I mean, I've been investing for longer than 10 years, but I think like a larger chunk was in the past 10 years, as my income has also increased, being further in my career and so forth. And seeing the compounding effect of that is kind of magical, as we do with our super, right? A lot of us have
Mm.
started out with our super. We had nothing in our super, and we see that grow over time. Seeing the dividends land into your bank account in the way that rent does is such a great feeling when you get it, because you know that your money is making money, but you're not doing anything like for it. Whereas when you're managing a rental property, there's a lot of maintenance that goes, a lot of considerations, the tenants that you have, and so forth, and costs associated with that. Whereas investing is kind of this magical thing that just does its own thing on the side. So I've always been really passionate about it. For people who don't know what FIRE is, Financial Independence Retire Early, it's a movement that focuses on investing 25 times your expenses. And the idea is that once you reach that number, you can live off of the money that your investments make for you. That's the rule of thumb. It doesn't mean it's accurate for everyone, but that's the idea. And for a lot of people, it's like, how am I ever going to have 25 times my expenses? That's insane. That's if I have $40,000 a year in expenses, that's $1 million. Like, how will I make that money? But compounding is pretty magical. Again, it comes down to if you do it early enough and often enough. That's kind of where we see the big difference.
Yeah, well said. Well said. I like that. Yeah, you answered, I think, what everyone was thinking, which is, how on earth do I do that? I know you got your book that come out as well with Tash, which is Get Rich Slow Club. So tune into that podcast. I mean, I've jumped in and had to listen to some of the episodes. And I think you're really covering this journey a lot, which is it's getting traction. The FIRE movement feels like it's gaining some traction. Obviously, it's people that are taking stock in life going, I could continue on this life, or maybe it's this treadmill that I'm on and being on mortgage for 30 years, wake up, work, pay my mortgage, sleep, repeat. And it's going, I'm not sure if this lifestyle is serving me and what are the other ways that I can get ahead. So whether it's investing in property, shares, ETFs, crypto, whatever your poison is, picking that, knowing your risks and rewards as well, doing your research, but then you also got to take some action. And we are very, very big on that when we try to talk about getting our community to 1% property investors. It's going, the market rewards action takers and decision makers. So if you need resources to lean on, whether that's this podcast, whether that's Anna, your podcast, or your books, for example, that you've put out, getting yourself that you can get educated, be knowledgeable, and then be able to pull the trigger on whatever decisions you're making. That's what we're about, enabling those decisions. So Anna, I want to say thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, sharing your energy and your wisdom. I really, really appreciate it. And I'm guaranteeing you, for all the parents that we've got in our community here, they're going to love this episode. So thank you.
Thanks so much for having me.
I appreciate it. If you've listened and you've loved this episode, let us know. We're getting some awesome DMs that are coming in and people having the episodes and the content. So really appreciate that people take the time to reach out. Like I said, we don't really worry too much about give us 5-star reviews or any of that jazz. What we care about is you passing this message on to someone who you think would love this episode. So if you know someone that's maybe expecting a baby or very early stages of having a child, and you think, hey, check this episode out, money, babies, financial freedom and future, this just could be the episode that they're looking for as well. Thanks again, Anna. We'll talk to you soon very much. That's a wrap for another episode of the Australian Property Investment Podcast.